Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to the Hindu newspaper analysis for today. Before we begin, there are a couple of important announcements. First, again, as you know, we are now on Telegram. If you have still not joined the Telegram channel, you can do that by using the link given in the description of the video. There you will get all the latest current affairs updates about the UPSC examination. Also, as you know, tomorrow is Wednesday, and Wednesday is the day for our International Relations This Week episode to come live to you. So, tomorrow, don't forget to join us at 8 pm for the International Relations This Week episode, where we will be discussing the most important news with respect to international relations live on our YouTube channel. Now, let's begin with the first article that is written by the Union Minister of Tourism, Culture and Development of Northeast Region. He has written this article on the occasion of the World Tourism Day, which is observed on the 27th of September. As the name suggests, and as you can guess, this article is written to tell us about what are the different steps that the government of India is taking to enhance India's tourism potential. In the past few years, you would have seen that the government of India has been focusing a lot on tourism. For example, a lot of nations are now offered visa on arrival in India. The government of India has also been focusing on improving the infrastructure in the hospitality sector. There are a lot of different government schemes that have come up, tourist circuits that have come up. All of this because the government has been focusing on improving the tourism sector in India. There are various reasons for that. International tourists, when they come into the country, they bring in very precious foreign exchange, which is extremely helpful for the country. Secondly, it brings a lot of good employment opportunities for people in the country. This also gives a boost to the hospitality sector that employs a large number of people in India. And thirdly, obviously, it will improve India's international prestige. All this can be done if we focus on tourism as a main sector of our industry. This is what this article is all about. The minister here is saying that recently the state tourism ministers, all of them gathered on the invitation of the union government and discussed how to develop tourism in India. This led to something called the Dharmshala Declaration, where all the states agreed to take significant steps forward in this direction. This declaration aims to recognize India's role in contributing towards global tourism and also focusing on domestic tourism. If you remember, before the pandemic, when Prime Minister Modi gave his Independence Day speech in 2019, he urged every Indian who could afford to travel to visit at least 15 locations in India by 2022. Now, as you know, in the country, there is a new trend that has developed. People prefer going outside India to explore new destinations rather than actually exploring destinations within India. People rather prefer going to Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Mauritius, Maldives, etc., rather than exploring our own destinations within the country. This is what the Prime Minister had been telling the country before the pandemic. Tourism Ministry also is working in this direction. They have worked with the Ministry of External Affairs to identify 20 Indian missions, means 20 Indian embassies abroad, which have the highest tourist footfall to India, and then build strategies specifically to attract tourists from those nations into India. COVID, as you know, had a very disastrous impact on the hospitality and the tourism industry. This was, in fact, one industry that was completely shut down because of the lockdown. That is why post COVID, the government of India increased emergency credit line guarantee scheme to 5 lakh crore that will benefit hospitality and all the related sectors, including the hotels, including the guides, the drivers, all of these working in this sector. Not just this, the Ministry of Tourism has also prepared a draft National Tourism Policy of 2022, which aims at improving the conditions of tourism in the country. Now, tourism has often been regarded as one of those things that may go against the environment of the country. Many people believe that tourists, especially those who are not that responsible, will have a negative impact on the environment. You can go to places such as Goa. A lot of people who are locals in Goa don't really appreciate many tourists coming in because, according to them, they hamper the local culture and the local environment of the place. This is where the government has been focusing on keeping tourism sustainable and responsible. The National Green Tourism Mission that the Government of India runs also focuses on the same. The Union Minister who has written this article says that India being the president of G20 in the coming summit is also an amazing opportunity for India. Because as you know, The G20 summit doesn't just mean one meeting. When the G20 summit is held, before that, a series of meetings are held for various purposes. In fact, as a G20 president, India will host close to 200 meetings with delegates from all around the world. This also gives India a chance to display to the world how many diverse cities do we have and the amazing infrastructure that we can develop in those cities. Close to 35 cities have already been identified by the ministry for this purpose. And the goal is to increase the incoming tourist numbers in these cities, both domestic as well as international. The author says that by mid 2024, we would be at the pre pandemic level and would be able to achieve $150 billion as GDP contribution from tourism only. Tourism industry in India is set to grow at a fast pace and can be a very good job generator for the government of India and can take away a lot of its worry. Now, the article here mentions a bit about the National Tourism Policy Draft. I wanted to share with you some of the important pointers of this policy. The policy says that this sector, that is the tourism sector, should also be given the status of industry so that a lot of other government schemes and government benefits are applicable to this. The policy also says that 5 key areas will be focused on in the next 10 years: green tourism, digital tourism, destination management, the skilling of hospitality sector people, and supporting tourism related to the MSMEs. Apart from that, the Government of India, as per this policy, will also focus on providing taxation breaks and relief to those industries and those companies working in this sector that have been hard done by because of the pandemic. Now, you also must understand the current tourism scenario in the country and a look at some of the numbers related to tourism in India. As you know, India has been seen as an extremely attractive tourist destination for people across the world. India has a unique proposition. We are a country which has highest of mountains to the deserts. We have a country that have the Western Ghats. We have the country that have so many rivers. We have a country with a lot of diverse culture. All of that to find in one single country is not very easy. We have the winter desert that you can see in Ladakh. We have the summer desert that you can see in Rajasthan. All of these are available in one single country. That is why India is still to realize its true potential. We can do so much better. India's tourism right now is ranked at 10th position in terms of contribution to the world GDP in the World Trade and Tourism Council report. In India, travel and tourism sector is also one of the largest employers and employs nearly 12.75% of employment in the country. India has 40 sites which are a part of the World Heritage List, including Dholavira, Ramappa Temple, which were the latest additions. It is expected that by 2029, 5.3 crore people in India might get jobs in tourism, but all of that would require a lot more investment in infrastructure and the hospitality sector from the government and from the private sector. The Government of India has also been running multiple schemes to give a boost to tourism in India. There is a Swadesh Darshan scheme. There is a national mission on pilgrimage, rejuvenation and spiritual heritage augmentation drive called Prashad. Then we have the Ek Bharat Shresht Bharat scheme, which talks about pairing of states and exchange of culture. Then we have the Dekho Apna Desh initiative, Adopt Heritage and Destination Northeast as well. These are just some of the initiatives taken by the Government of India in this regard. The next article that we have here is an interesting take on what happened in Samarkand in the recent SCO summit. The author here is a former ambassador of India to multiple international organizations. He was also the Director General of Kerala International Center. He says that the SCO summit actually gives a very good idea of where the world is heading. He says that if you look at the proceedings of the SCO, India was kind of an outlier in the sense that Russia right now is busy with its invasion. China, the Central Asian nations, Pakistan, no one said even one single word against Russia about the invasion in the SCO summit. India was the only country that actually openly said that this is not an era of war. India was the only country that demanded that hostilities should be stopped and we should resolve the matter through democracy and diplomacy. Now, not many people had expected this. India, in fact, also spoke about the oil crisis, food scarcity, most of which is because of the Ukraine-Russia crisis. As expected, Vladimir Putin did not take it seriously. He in fact blamed the Ukrainian government for just prolonging the crisis. The author says that what happened in SCO in this sense is very, very interesting. As you can see, India is slightly different as compared to the other SCO nations. Most of the other SCO nations do not have any perfect democracy. Look at China, look at Russia, look at Pakistan, now look at Iran, which is the new member, look at the Central Asian nations. Except India, the other SCO nations don't really believe in democratic principles. India could not even utilize the SCO summit to have a face to face meeting with China. So the author says that SCO has now emerged as kind of a block where India would not really get a lot of friends. So as per the author, India should rather focus on those groups which have democratic nations, such as the US. So he says that India's focus should now be on US, should now be on the Quad nations, because just being in the SCO is not really serving us any purpose. The Russia China relationship will just become stronger because they need each other, and India cannot expect either of the two nations to be very, very friendly to us. He also says that SCO in the coming years will be dominated by China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan axis because they don't really believe in democratic principles and they have many common goals, unlike India. This is what his opinion is. Please remember, these are op-ed articles, means opinion of the author. This is not to say that this is a fact or the government of India is thinking in this direction. However, because this opinion has been given based on the code by our Prime Minister, I also wanted to give you a counter opinion. What is a counter opinion? The counter opinion is that India is not really taking sides and going towards the US. In fact, on the other hand, India has actually joined Russia, China, etc. in trying to see an alternative to the American dollar. If you remember, in the past few days, we had discussed how many nations across the world are trying to have bilateral trade in other currencies except the dollar because they don't want to give such powers to US to freeze their assets. India is also doing the same. So I'm just giving a counter view to make you understand that whatever you are reading in the op-ed is not really a fact, it's just an opinion. There are different ways in which people see what is happening at the international stage, and you should have both points of view in your mind while attempting to write any answer. The next article that we have here is about semiconductor industry and how the government of India is trying to give a push to this industry in India. As you know, the government of India is aiming to attract as much investment as possible. In this regard, the reason why this is in the news is the government of India recently made changes to the scheme of the semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem and made it even more lucrative. We'll just discuss what the change in the scheme is. The global semiconductor industry, as you know, has been in the news for quite a long time, ever since the global pandemic started. As you know, semiconductor chips right now are an integral part of almost every single appliance that you use. Be it cars, mobile phones, the laptops, the tablets, every single thing that you use right now related to electronics has hundreds and thousands of semiconductor chips. But the production of these chips is concentrated in just a few nations: US, South Korea, and Taiwan, where Taiwan has been emerging as a very, very strong player, especially in those chips which are 5 nanometer. They are mass produced in Taiwan. Because of the global pandemic and the supply chain disruption, the entire world saw a huge shortage of these chips. And this is where not just India, but nations across the world are now trying to boost their own production of semiconductor chips. The reason is that the global semiconductor industry is right now valued at 500 to 600 billion dollars. The US also recently gave a funding of over $50 billion for Chips and Science Act. EU also gave a funding of 43 billion euros for public and private sector investment. So India's investment of $10 billion is very, very little as compared to the investment made by US and EU, but it is actually a good step in the correct direction. India in December 2021 itself had announced this scheme of production linked incentive to encourage the semiconductor and display manufacturing in the country. It is expected that the semiconductor demand in India will increase as more and more population is turning towards gadgets, electronics, as the population is increasing, the demand for all these things will only increase in the future. And it makes a lot of sense for the nation like India to depend on its own internal market. Now, what change exactly has been introduced? Let's look at that. In the earlier version of the scheme, the government had said that they will give 30% funds in those projects which are for 45 to 65 nanometer chip production. Then the government said 40% help will be given for 28 to 45 nanometer chip production and 50% help will be given for chips of 28 nanometer or below. Now the government has even increased it. Now the government has said, irrespective of the size of the chip, we will give 50% support for all these chips manufacturing. The government said, we will also provide 50% capital expenditure for other steps. So government in a way has increased its support for the people or the industries who want to work in this direction. Recently, as you would have seen, it was in the news that Vedanta and Foxconn are coming together to make a huge manufacturing plant that was first supposed to be in Maharashtra, but it got shifted to Gujarat. After that, there were two other projects also that have been announced. A $3 billion plant that will come up in Karnataka by International Consortium ISMC and a $3.5 billion plant in Tamil Nadu as well. So this seems to be a step in the correct direction and the government seems to be making the correct decisions at the correct time. However, not everything is hunky-dory. There are obviously a lot of challenges that still remain in the chip production. For example, it is a very, very resource intensive and expensive process. As we just saw, all the government has announced $10 billion of help. This is not even 1/5 of what has been announced by EU and US. The reason is that this industry for setting up everything requires a huge, huge amount of money. Just setting up one semiconductor fabrication lab requires an investment of $3 to $7 billion. So it's not a lot of money that the government of India has announced. Not just this, chip making also requires a lot of water to be used every single day. In a country where many places are still undergoing drought-like situations, this will also be a challenge. So it remains to be seen how the government is able to tackle these challenges in the coming years. As I said, semiconductor industry right now is connected to almost everything that is made in the field of electronics right now. As you can see this graph, this tells you how the nations across the world contribute to the semiconductor chip market. Now you might say, as per this graph, Taiwan is not the leader. US, South Korea, Japan, EU are much, much higher. But where Taiwan comes into the picture is, as we discussed, the semiconductor chips that are extremely, extremely small in size. This is where Taiwan is a world leader. And these are the chips that are required in increasing numbers in all these appliances that are now being made. The next article that we have here is about a disaster that happened in Kerala in 2020. Now, this article is not really focusing on this disaster because the tragedy of the landslides that happened in Pettimudi, that was in August 2020. So nothing new has happened. The reason why this article has been written is many researchers have actually been studying this kind of an event where they are making a point that whenever a natural disaster occurs, the response of the government, the state government or the center government, is very different depending upon who are the people who have been impacted. For example, the landslides that took place in Kerala in August 2020, because the people who were killed, the people who were impacted were just tea estate laborers, were people who were very, very poor. So although 65 workers were killed, there was almost nothing that changed in the government's attitude. They were not really given a lot of compensation, there were no protests, and no one actually gave a lot of attention. Similarly, just next day, we saw an air tragedy in Kerala. And the response to that from the government side was extremely, extremely different and contrasting as compared to what had happened in this landslide. This is not the first time that this has happened. The apathy of the government is very, very clear whenever you see poor people or socially and educationally backward people are involved in such kind of a disaster. In fact, the history of plantation workers, if you actually see in India, has been marred with all these kind of controversies. Although bonded labor, slavery has been banned in India ever since our independence, but the Plantation Labor Act of 1951 did not really give these workers any social security. Many of these workers who work in these tea estates live in accommodation which are called the layums. Layums are very, very old houses that are almost a century old, not maintained well, and they are very, very prone to any natural disaster that can occur at that place. The rehabilitation facilities given by the government in this area is almost next to zero. Now, as I said, the article is not focused on that one particular incident. It is just a study of how, whenever such kind of a disaster occurs, the people at the lowest section of the society have the worst response from the side of the government. Now, I want to take the same example and map it to international level. See, whenever you say that the people at the lowest section of the society within the country, the poor people always have the worst end of the bargain. Trust me, even at the international level, exactly the same scenario follows. Let's take the same example in terms of what is happening in the climate change debate. All of us accept and understand the fact it is the developed nations that are mostly responsible for increasing temperatures, for global warming. However, when you see which are the nations that have had to suffer extreme climatic events, in that list you will not see any developed nation. It is the developing nations that have to bear the brunt of what the developed nations were doing. Be it the economic losses in terms of GDP, be it the number of climatic events of extreme nature that they have had to face, the loss of life. You see what is happening in Pakistan. All of that is because the developed nations were the one that could not control their greed. And again, these kind of things do not really make any international news. Again, I don't want to compare one country with the other, but you also know when people die because of natural disaster in a very poor country, how much news does it make? As compared to when people die in a developed nation, how much news does that make? So this is not just within a country, this is actually an international phenomenon. The next article that we have here is about the center government's decision to ask the smartphone makers that the navigation system that they use now should be based on NavIC. As you know, NavIC is actually India's own indigenous navigation system. I'm sure all of you would have heard of GPS. GPS is global positioning system developed by the US military. Software such as Google Map etc. are based on the GPS. This is owned by America. Now, every government across the world, India including, wants to have its own technology to depend on. That is why the government of India has also made its own navigation system called NavIC. This NavIC system is what the government wants the smartphones to use now in place of a GPS. So government of India has been calling for meetings from Samsung, Apple, Xiaomi, these kind of phone manufacturers. On the other hand, these companies are fearful because they say for such a change their cost will increase considerably. They say that hardware and software changes will be required if they have to shift from GPS to NavIC. That is why they don't really want to go on this path. As you know, it is not just US. China, European Union, Japan, Russia, all of them have their own navigation systems. While GPS belong to US, all others have their own navigation systems. NavIC, that is India's version, started in 2018. Please do remember a very important difference. The other navigation systems by these nations, including GPS, have global coverage. So if you are in Australia or Paris or Maldives or India or Canada, the same GPS will be able to work and give you the coverage. NavIC, on the other hand, is not an international system. This is designed to cover India and 1500 kilometers radius from India. So please do understand this. NavIC is not an international or global navigation system. NavIC is a regional navigation system. So there is no strict deadline that the government of India has now put into place, but the government of India is still trying to deliberate with the smartphone makers what can be the deadline. The government said that we can try for January 1 deadline, but these companies have still not really been very supportive of this. So a strict deadline has still not been given. It remains to be seen what becomes the deadline. I'm sure all of you would already have heard about IRNSS. This is the official name of NavIC. This stands for Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System. It consists of 7 satellites. 3 are geostationary while 4 are geosynchronous. This infographic has all the details that you need to remember. As I said, this is not a global navigation system. This covers India and up to 1500 kilometers from its border. This will be controlled by the government. Just like many other navigation systems, this also has two versions. One version is open for the civilians like you and me, we can use it, and the other version is open only for the military, which is much more accurate. Just like GPS also has two versions. The military version of GPS can only be used by the US military, while the civilian ones is open for others. The accuracy is said to be even better as compared to the GPS. These were the important articles in the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number one. India's path to becoming a significant player in the semiconductor chip industry is filled with stumbling blocks. Discuss. Second. How is the government planning to exploit India's true potential as a tourism hub for people across the world? Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.